Hello, everybody. This is our presentation on Santel's justice, which is purpose, loyalty, and the common good. It will be presented by Ravneet Kaur, myself, Elizabeth Fowler, Christina Valenzuela, and John Anthony. Next slide, please. This is a little bit of our outline, kind of what we'll be covering today. First, we're going to go over, Ravneet's going to do chapter 8, which is Who Deserves What by Aristotle. Then we're going to go next into chapter 9, which will be by Christina, which is What Do We Owe One Another? Next, John is going to present chapter 10, which is Justice and the Common Good. We will then look at a case study about Harvard admissions and what is going on at Harvard. Then we're going to move into telos in practice. We're going to have our panels actually pretend as if they were on an admissions team and what would their policy be. Then we're going to conclude with an image of Raphael's School of Athens. So next I would like to pass it over to Ravneet, who's going to be covering chapter 9.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'll begin by explaining telos, which is what the focus of our presentation will be on. Telos means the purpose and or essential nature. In chapter 8, Sandel explains Aristotle's view that justice is teleological and justice is honorific. First, justice is teleological because for Aristotle, we can't decide what a fair distribution is until we ask, what is this thing for? Sandel uses the flute example for this. If we are distributing flutes, Aristotle says that the best flute should go to the best player, not to the richest, most popular, or to the best looking, because the purpose of a flute is to be played well. So the right person to receive it depends on the telos of the object. Second, Sandel says justice is honorific, because distributing something also involves honoring certain qualities. When we give the best flute to the best musician, we're not just handing out an object, we're also saying, this excellence is what matters here. So for Aristotle, arguments about justice are often arguments about what we should value and honor. Sandel uses that same idea in the cheerleading story where a student who's in a wheelchair, she wants to be a cheerleader. The controversy isn't just about whether she should get a spot. It ends up turning into an argument about what cheerleading is for and whether the excellent cheerleader is the one who's the most attractive, most popular, or the best at the actual skills and role cheerleading is supposed to perform. Basically, the disagreement is really about what counts as excellence in cheerleading, and that depends on what people think cheerleading is supposed to be. Sandel's point is you can't answer who deserves the spot until you answer what is this activity for. Because once you define the purpose of cheerleading, you automatically define what excellence means. And this is why some people end up in arguments because it's not only about fairness, it's also about who gets honored and what traits a community thinks should be rewarded. So the big takeaway from chapter 8 is when we argue about fairness and who deserves what, we're usually arguing about purpose and what virtues should be rewarded even if we don't realize it. The idea of telos is what we will use to connect chapter 8 to our current event and our exercise. And now I will pass it on to Christina, who will be covering chapter 9.
Thank you, Ravneet. So, chapter 9 asks a really important question. Do we only owe duties that we freely choose, or do we have responsibilities that come from belonging to families, communities, or nations? Modern day standards and theories of justice say that our obligations come from consent. So, this is evident through things like contracts or promises we make or agree to. Sandel chooses to press on this idea that by arguing that some obligations come from relationships and histories we didn't choose, yet we still feel a moral obligation to them. So a common example of this, that we often have stronger relationships towards our families or communities than towards strangers, even if we never agree to those duties. The same question appears when societies debate whether current generations owe anything for past injustices. This chapter really pushes us to think about justice, not just in terms of individual choice, but also in terms of loyalty, membership, and shared responsibility. Ultimately, Sandel asks us to consider what we owe one another as members of communities and not just as independent individuals. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to John so he can discuss chapter 10.
All right, thank you, Christina. And moving on, we'll start with Chapter 10, Justice and the Common Good, and specifically religion and public life. And in this section, we'll be comparing liberal neutrality versus moral engagement. On the liberal neutrality side, we go through John F. Kennedy's view and also John Rawls' view. For John F. Kennedy, he believes that religion should be private, government must stay neutral, and we must protect pluralism by avoiding moral claims. While John Rawls also agrees that justice should be separate from the good life by offering this question: what principles would free and equal citizens choose under fair conditions? On the moral engagement side, we have Barack Obama, who believes that faith shapes political values, moral language belongs in public debate, and politics require deeper meaning. And Sandel and Aristotle would also be on the moral judgment side, where they ask, what is the telos? What virtues are we honoring? John F. Kennedy and Barack Obama offered different views on this role of the religion in American politics. Kennedy argued that religion should remain a private matter, reflecting a liberal ideal of government neutrality on moral and religious questions to preserve pluralism and tolerance. Obama later challenged this approach, contending that moral and religious convictions inevitably shape political values and should not be excluded from public discourse. Chapter 10 builds on Chapter 8 by showing the attempt at liberal neutrality in politics mirrors Rawls' effort to separate justice from conceptions of the good life. Kennedy embodies that neutrality, while Obama reflects Sandel's argument that injustice inevitably involves more reasoning about the common good. Just as Chapter 8 argues that we cannot determine what marriage is without asking its telos, Chapter 10 shows we cannot determine justice in politics without engaging moral and religious convictions. Elizabeth, passing it back on to you.
Okay, so now we've seen telos in theory, right? So we've talked about flutes, the cheerleading, loyalty, even common good, just to name a few things, in action. So Harvard they had a major policy reversal. And in that reversal, they reversed their test optional admissions policy, which is resulted in standardized testing is now required again. So that was the original policy. They reversed it, and now it's back to the original policy. So that pretty much ended the COVID era flexibility, which they had adopted in 2020. This is where things get a little interesting. So Harvard says that tests are a common yardstick they use to help identify students from all backgrounds who will thrive academically. But critics push back hard. They argue that these tests favor wealthy students who can afford expensive test preps and tutors to get prepared. So let's notice what's actually happening here, right? The debate centers around what merit means and what universities are for. What is Harvard for? This is Aristotle's insight in action, literally. So remember what Ravneet explained about the flutes. We can't decide who deserves the best flute until we ask ourselves, what is a flute for? And what is the purpose of a flute? Same logic applies here. We can't decide who deserves Harvard admission until we answer what is Harvard for. So your answer to Harvard, what is it for, will shape your entire admission policy. Let's go to the next slide, please. So that's the debate Harvard is facing, right? Different people, different views. But here's the thing, it's easy to critique Harvard's decision. What's harder is making the call yourself. So what we're gonna do is ask our panel that question exactly. So we will have Ravneet, John, and Christina. They're going to be on an admissions team at the university. And if you were part of an admissions committee at this university, I would like to ask each of you, what would your policy be? Anyone would like to start, go for it.
I can go first. Thank you for your question. So if I were on an admissions committee, I would start with the question, what is the university for? And my answer to that would be that the university exists to educate students, and students from different walks of life bring different perspectives that strengthen learning and prepare everyone to lead in a diverse society. Based on that, Talos, my criteria would focus on academics, contribution to the classroom experience, and potential for leadership. So in terms of academics, I would consider grades and test scores, but I would read them in context, which includes school resources, access to advanced classes, and obstacle faced. This is because I believe scores don't always reflect true potential. In terms of contribution to the classroom experience, I would consider what a student's background and past experience adds to classroom discussion, including racial and cultural diversity, because education is richer when students learn from people that are not like themselves. Lastly, potential for leadership. I would look for signs that the student will use their education to contribute to and serve society. This is because my university's mission includes developing future leaders who can thrive in diverse public spaces. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Christina, John?
I can go next. So, Ravneet, I really like your point that universities exist to educate students from diverse backgrounds and contribute to society. I'd like to build on that, though. I'd say universities also have a responsibility not just to the individual students themselves, but to the communities that they would serve and already serve and the communities they come from. So, tying this back to chapter 9, it really reminds us that we aren't just individuals competing for opportunities, but we're also shaped by families, communities, histories we didn't choose. And those connections create responsibilities. Based on that, if I was on an admissions committee, I would start off by asking, what do we owe society through higher education? I'd say universities should prepare people not just for careers, but to give back to their communities. Based on that purpose, my criteria would be strong academic preparation, as you mentioned. I think that's a fundamental criteria that we can't really stray from. I appreciate your approach with looking at things like test scores, in context to school resources, the availability of advanced classes, etc. And then to build off that, secondly, I would look for evidence of commitment or connection to the community. Students who already show, for example, responsibility or services towards others. And thirdly, I'd consider resilience or obstacles overcome because talent exists everywhere, but opportunity does not. Recognizing resilience helps universities support students who may use education not just for personal success, but to strengthen the communities they come from. And Ravneet, this connects to your point about looking at achievement in context, but I'd use that context not just to evaluate academic performance, but also to understand resilience and responsibility to the community. So just to end that point, admissions isn't just about individual achievement, also recognizing our obligations to one another, which is exactly what Sendell challenges us to think about in these chapters. So let's hear from John.
Yeah, thank you, Christina. And before I get my response, I'm going to first of all structure it in the order that I believe ties back to what we've talked about in the chapters, and also buffering the points that Ravneet and Christina have already mentioned. So beginning at what I think what I see Harvard as an institution, or universities in general. I see them as a place of, finding its telos, which would be places where they are a cultivator of resilience, a builder of leaders, a generator of authentic intellectual contribution. So to that, I value growth, innovation, and authenticity. My first criteria would be demonstrated growth under circumstances, which Ravneet and Christina have mentioned before. And I would like to offer this example. So a 3.0 student who excelled despite instability, poverty, or family hardship demonstrates resilience, discipline, and character. That achievement may represent greater intellectual virtue than a 3.8 student who earned that in an environment that's fully conducive to academic success. This ties directly to Sandel's discussion of merit and desert. If we simply reward outcomes without considering conditions, we risk confusing luck with merit. And Rawls would remind us that natural talents and favorable environments are morally arbitrary, which be on the contrary. But I believe that fairness requires looking at context, not just numbers. And number two, a capacity for innovation. This would be our second criteria. Each student should articulate how they plan to contribute to knowledge or society. If Harvard exists to generate ideas and leadership, then admission should not just reward past performance, but future contribution. This aligns with Sandel's argument that justice cannot be neutral about purpose. If a university's purpose is innovation, then it should select students who show potential to innovate. This is teleological argument. This is a teleological argument. If the purpose of a university is intellectual advancement, then the relevant virtue is creative and forward-thinking capacity. And lastly, my third criteria would be authentic intellectual voice. I would require a handwritten proctored letter of intent. Why? Because admissions should evaluate the person, not outsource polished or AI-generated performance. Sandel critiques systems that reduce human goods to market logic. If essays become products optimized through coaching and technology, we lose sight of authenticity. This protects fairness and accurate judgment. It also honors integrity as a virtue. If Harvard's telos includes cultivating independent thinkers, then admissions should reward original thought and not only strategic packaging. Thank you.
Thank you guys. I enjoyed those answers. So as you guys can see, at the end of the day, it all comes down to what you believe Harvard is for. What is the purpose? And the purpose determines the policy. Can you go to the next slide, please? So this brings us back to Aristotle. Let's end with an image that basically captures it all. So as you guys can see in this image, this is Raphael's School of Athens. So on the left-hand side in the like pinkish reddish robe, we have Plato, who is pointing up to the heavens. And to the right in the bluish, purplish looking robe, we have Aristotle, who is pointing down to the earth. That one, these gestures basically capture everything. So Plato searched for perfect, abstract ideals somewhere up in these heavens. As you can see, he's pointing up. But Aristotle actually looked at the real world. What things actually do? What are they actually for? What is their purpose? For Aristotle, justice isn't about discovering universal principles floating above us. It's about understanding the end, goal, or purpose in practical context. That is telos. In conclusion, we want you to think about our journey today. We asked ourselves, what are flutes for? Who deserves them? What is cheerleading for? Who should make the team? What is Harvard for? Who deserves admissions? Every time we argued about fairness, about who deserves what we're actually arguing about is the purpose. Until we agree on what something is for, we'll never agree on how to distribute it fairly. And that's Aristotle's enduring insight into justice. Thank you, everybody.